The movie begins with a man named Dalton Russell. He is in a tiny cell that doesn't have much light. He speaks directly to the camera, claiming that he has executed a perfect bank robbery. He continues the monologue, telling us that after the heist, he simply walks out through the front door without getting caught. Finally, he ends his monologue by inviting us to see exactly how he pulled it all off. A few days earlier, Russell and his crew arrive at the Manhattan Trust Bank. Disguised as a painter, Russell casually walks inside and disables the security cameras using an infrared bulb. Moments later, his team enters, locks the doors from the inside, and quickly takes control of the bank, forcing everyone to the ground. Russell announces to the hostages that they are about to make a very large withdrawal from the bank. He warns that anyone who tries to interfere will get a bullet in the head. Meanwhile, outside the bank, a police officer notices smoke coming from the building. Just as he is about to report it, Russell steps out, points a gun at him, and warns him that he has hostages and will hurt them if the police come near the bank. As soon as Russell goes back inside, the officer quickly reports the armed robbery in progress at Manhattan Trust Bank. Within minutes, the police swarm the area and seal off the street. At the same time, Arthur Case, the owner of the bank, hears from Casman that one of his branches is being robbed. Initially, Case seems unconcerned. However, the moment he learns that it is branch 32, he suddenly becomes visibly nervous. Meanwhile, detectives Fraser and Mitchell from the hostage negotiation team arrive at the scene. They question the officer who has reported the robbery, asking how many robbers are inside. However, the officer admits he isn't sure. Shortly after, Fraser and Mitchell enter the mobile command center to assess the situation. Inside the bank, the robbers waste no time. They gather the hostages in the safe room, lining them up and separating the bank employees from the other customers. To conceal their identities, the robbers are not using their real names. Instead, they all call each other Steve and Stevie. Russell orders the hostages to hand over their keys and phones. Most comply immediately, but one man attempts to hide his phone. When Russell finds it, he drags the man into a separate room and beats him severely as a warning to the others. Afterward, Russell asks if anyone else is hiding a phone. This time, a young boy steps forward and shows him a gaming device. However, Russell tells him he can keep it. Next, Russell instructs everyone to strip down to their underwear. Then, all the hostages are forced to put on identical outfits and masks, making it impossible to distinguish the hostages from the robbers. At one point, an elderly hostage falls ill. Showing a rare moment of mercy, the robbers release him. However, when the man reaches the police outside, officers force him to kneel and handcuff him, unsure whether he is truly a hostage or one of the robbers. The man then delivers a message from the robbers. If the police come near the bank, the robbers will start killing hostages. Despite the threat, Fraser decides it isn't the right time to negotiate. Instead, he chooses to wait and carefully observe the robbers' next move. Back inside, the robbers move through the bank, eventually reaching the room where the money is stored. However, they ignore the cash and continue searching for another room. It is becoming clear they are not here for the money. After a thorough search, they finally locate the supply room. Without hesitation, they begin digging into the ground. Meanwhile, Arthur Case meets with a powerful broker named White. He asks her to protect the items of a safety deposit box in his bank, but refuses to reveal what's inside. Instead, he simply insists that the items must remain safe at all costs. At the same time, the police discover the robber's van and begin searching for fingerprints, but they can't get any fingerprints. Meanwhile, Fraser finally decides to call the bank. However, Russell ignores the ringing phone, refusing to answer. Shortly after, the police retrieve security footage from the bank's cameras. As they review the recordings, they watch how the robbers systematically disable every security camera inside the bank. Suddenly, the officers notice movement in front of the bank. Another hostage is released, but this time, there's a box strapped around his neck. Fearing it might be a bomb, the police carefully remove it and inspect the contents. However, it turns out to be just a message. The robbers are making their demands. They want 2 buses and a plane by 9 p.m., threatening to kill a hostage every hour if the deadline is missed. Moments later, Arthur Case arrives at the crime scene and asks the police if the robbers have made any requests. When Captain Darius informs him about the demand for a plane, Case quickly offers to arrange it. However, Fraser dismisses the offer, explaining that it isn't necessary now. He assures Case that they'll reach out if the situation changes. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, White meets with the mayor of New York, requesting a favor. She tells him she needs access to monitor the hostage situation for a client. Though initially hesitant, the mayor eventually agrees to help her. Inside the bank, the robbers continue shuffling the hostages between rooms, with one of the robbers blending in by posing as a hostage. Meanwhile, the digging in the supply room continues. Later, the robbers request food. Seizing an opportunity, the police devise a plan to plant a listening device inside the food delivery. To execute this plan effectively, they decide to use pizza. When the food arrives, Fraser takes the chance to introduce himself to Russell, attempting to start a conversation. However, Russell remains silent, showing no interest in engaging. The robbers grab the food and immediately lock the bank doors. Once the police activate the listening device, they quickly realize that the robbers are speaking in a foreign language. To identify the language, they play the recording publicly, hoping someone in the crowd will recognize it. Sure enough, a construction worker steps forward, identifying the language as Albanian due to his ex-wife's heritage. However, he admits that he doesn't understand what they're saying. Fraser then asks him to contact his ex-wife for help. When the woman arrives and listens to the recording, she immediately recognizes the deception. It isn't a conversation at all. Instead, it is a speech given by a former Albanian president. It turns out, the robbers have anticipated the police bugging them and cleverly played a random tape to throw them off. Inside the bank, Russell opens a safety deposit box containing documents and diamonds. However, he takes only the documents. Meanwhile, the mayor arrives at the crime scene and introduces White to Fraser. He then orders Fraser to involve White in the situation. Fraser is hesitant, but the mayor threatens to have him jailed if he refuses. Left with no alternative, Fraser reluctantly agrees. Later, after multiple attempts, Russell finally answers the phone and speaks with Fraser. However, he simply repeats his demands and hangs up. At this point, it becomes clear that Russell is just stalling. He never intends to escape by plane or bus. Instead, he is buying time to execute his true plan. Back in the supply room, the robbers complete their digging, which is a crucial step in executing their robbery plan. Moments later, Fraser calls Russell again and tells him to speak with White. White then negotiates with Russell, convincing him to meet her in person. In response, the robbers grant her entry into the bank. Inside, White makes Russell an offer, a reduced prison sentence and $2 million upon release in exchange for the contents of the safety deposit box. However, Russell refuses. Instead, he turns the conversation around, revealing that he knows all about her employer, Arthur Case, and his dark past as a Nazi collaborator in Switzerland during World War II. He also tells her how her boss used his blood money to start a bank. To prove his claims, Russell presents the documents from the deposit box, concrete evidence that Case is a war criminal. He then makes it clear to White that he will hold on to the evidence to ensure both she and Case help him if he ever gets caught from the robbery. Later, Fraser begins to realize that Russell has been anticipating their every move. Recognizing the need for a different approach, he decides to change tactics. This time, he offers to provide the robbers with the plane and buses, but on one condition. Before granting their demands, he insists on entering the bank to check on the hostages. Surprisingly, Russell agrees, and Fraser steps inside. He moves through the bank, ensuring all the hostages are okay. Seizing the opportunity, Fraser asks to take the young boy with him, but Russell refuses. As Fraser and Russell approach the exit, Fraser asks, "How do you plan to get out of here?" With a smirk, Russell responds confidently, "I'll walk right out through the front door." Suddenly, Fraser attacks, attempting to unmask Russell. However, another robber intervenes, pointing an AK-47 at Fraser and forcing him out of the bank. Afterward, Russell heads back to the supply room to check on the progress of their work. He is informed that the task will be completed in 2 hours. However, since the police haven't met their demands within the deadline, they prepare to take action against the hostages. At the same time, Fraser is telling his colleagues that Russell doesn't seem like a murderer, but suddenly, the phone rings. It's Russell. He instructs the police to zoom in on the security camera on the bank's second floor. Moments later, to the horror of everyone watching, the robbers appear in front of the camera. Then, without hesitation, they execute a hostage. Outraged by the killing, the city's police chief immediately removes Fraser from command and transfers control of the operation to Captain Darius. Darius, who is now in charge of the scene, plans to storm the bank. But just before the raid, Fraser finds a listening device hidden under the box the robbers had previously used to send their demands. This means the robbers have been listening to every police conversation, including their plan to storm the bank. Realizing the danger, Fraser urgently calls Darius, warning him to stand down. However, However, Darius ignores the warning and orders the team to proceed. Just as the police prepare to breach the building, the robbers execute their final trick. They gather all the hostages and detonate smoke grenades, creating confusion. Taking advantage of the chaos, they discard their weapons and blend seamlessly with the hostages. As the police blow open the bank's front doors, a flood of people rushes out. Unable to distinguish the robbers from the hostages, the police have no choice but to detain everyone. Once inside, the police search the bank thoroughly but find no stolen money or dead bodies. In fact, the robbers haven't taken a single dollar. Even when the police inspect the supply room, they find nothing suspicious. Later, the police find the robbers' weapons, only to realize they were fake. Surprisingly, even the hostage killing was staged as well. With no money missing and no way to distinguish hostages from robbers, the police chief has no choice but to declare the case closed. However, Fraser isn't ready to let it go. Back at his office, he reviews the list of safety deposit boxes and notices that box 392 is missing. This is the very box Russell and his team had opened to retrieve Case's documents. Suspecting a cover-up, Fraser confronts White. He plays her a recording of her and the mayor threatening him, a conversation he secretly recorded during their meeting. Fraser offers her a choice. Either she gives him information about Case's deposit box, or he makes the recording public. Faced with no other option, White finally reveals the truth. Arthur Case built his wealth on blood money. Later, determined to get her own answers, White boldly confronts Case at an exclusive men's club. She knows the robbers were after more than just documents, so she presses him about what else was in the box. Case admits that, along with the documents, he had diamonds in the box, given to him by the Nazis, that are worth millions of dollars. He also confesses that there is also a Cartier ring, which once belonged to a wealthy French-Jewish family. Case had the chance to save them, but he betrayed them to the Nazis in exchange for money. After confessing his dark story, Case pulls out his checkbook and writes her a check, hoping to silence White. Meanwhile, the film returns to Russell, repeating his opening monologue. Seated in the hidden cell, he carefully examines the stolen diamonds. Then he turns off the lights and pushes a wall in the cell, revealing that he is hiding behind a false wall that he and his team constructed in the bank's supply room. With enough supplies to last, Russell patiently waits until the robbery news dies down. Now, a week after the robbery, he finally emerges from the hidden compartment, carrying the diamonds with him. Meanwhile, his team waits discreetly in a car parked across the street. Just then, they spot Fraser and Mitchell entering the bank. So, they immediately call Russell to warn him, but Russell remains calm. As he walks towards the bank's exit, he deliberately bumps into Fraser, subtly putting something into his pocket. Then, he casually exits the bank and joins his crew in the car, where Valerie greets him with a kiss. Inside the bank, Fraser and Mitchell open safety deposit box 392. Inside, they find an unfinished pack of juicy fruit gum, a jewelry box, and a stunning diamond ring. Alongside these items, there is a note that says, "Follow the ring." Following the clue, Fraser and Mitchell visit Case at his office. There, Fraser presents the ring in front of Case, telling him he knows its dark history. Later, Fraser meets with White and the mayor, showing them the ring. He then manages to convince White to go to the police and confess everything she knows about Case's crimes. In the final scene, Fraser finds a diamond in his pocket, left behind by Russell during their collision at the bank. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any of our future content.